Hey guys, we're going to be talking about two things today. First off, I'm still abusing Warmogs on support, and I'm going to be talking about two different ways to do that even more efficiently than people would if they were just building the item normally, and why I believe Warmogs is still good on support. And then I'm going to be giving a quick update on what I've been doing when it comes to leagues, since obviously I've been ranting and raving about how many games it's taking on my main account to get back to a certain rank. And so we'll be covering, what I think about smurfing compared to playing on your main account again, with a little bit more of an example and some evidence, because we're kind of running an experiment, since I believe that smurfing is a faster way to get back to high elo than continuing to play on your main account, which I think is really unfortunate and obviously should be fixed, because Riot shouldn't really be encouraging players to make a new account every split. So we'll be talking about that. As far as Warmogs is concerned, obviously I've been abusing it and winning with it quite a lot on my Smurf account. Same thing on my main. So you get the idea. I'm still just building the item. And a lot of people might look at this and say that I'm not adapting, or that, I don't understand the itemization, but of course they would be wrong, because, I'm the math guy. So when we take a look at Warmogs, I've just updated this from my Braum guide to reflect the current changes that have been made to Warmogs. There were significant nerfs to the item, really three nerfs that came through to the item. The first nerf was they increased the HP threshold from whatever it was before to 1500, and so that was significant because you couldn't just activate the item with the support item normally in the way that you would before, by building the item first item without having like an additional ruby crystal. But of course the HP threshold is still pretty low, and so there's definitely some ways to get to the HP threshold, which we'll talk about. So that would be a significant nerf if there weren't ways that were actually just beneficial to you to get around the cap, because there's multiple ways to get there, and we'll actually discuss which one I think is the best, and it's kind of surprising. So that nerf didn't really do a whole lot. And then as far as the other two nerfs, is they increased the cost by 200, but that's not like a huge deal. A lot of people may say that that's a huge deal because the item was already kind of expensive for a support, but especially in solo queue where you're getting a lot more gold, I really don't think it's that big of a deal. Again, you're not really looking at the total cost. I think people look at that total cost and they get dissuaded from building the item because of how expensive it is. But it was always an expensive item, and 200 gold is not really that much more to finish the item. The other thing that's really important to keep in mind is that, in my opinion, the main strength of Warmogs as an item is its efficiency in making you tanky, because you need so much HP early in order to be efficient on your resistances versus HP efficiency curve. And so the item is good not because of the passive that it has, but it's actually always been good just because of the amount of flat HP that it gives you. And so for that reason, delaying the passive doesn't really make that big of a difference in terms of both the HP cap and the slight gold nerf. And also, of course, we take that gold nerf into account in the math here, and you'll see how it can still be a totally great option despite the increased cost. And then finally, they did significantly nerf the movement speed. And, so now the item only gives you 4% movement speed. Before, I think the item was giving you something like 11% movement speed. But again, this is just an additional bonus. Since the item's already so much better than Locket, it's really just an additional bonus that you get, and it's not really that big of a deal that it's smaller. It is significantly smaller than it was before. I think it was 11% movement speed before. Now it's only 4%. I said if you had 400 movement speed here before, I think you were getting something crazy like 60 movement speed from the item, and now you're only getting 16. And so that's obviously significant, but A lot of people were claiming that Warmogs was good because the movement speed allowed you to roam better and things like that. And of course, that didn't really make sense because most of the movement speed that you were getting before came when you were completing the item. You're not really going to be building the movement speed component of the item very early on anyways if you're doing it correctly. So I don't actually think that the movement speed is that nice. Really, what you have to keep in mind is when you just compare the raw HP that the item gives you to an item like Locket, it already outpaces Locket. So anything that you get in addition to that, and this is outpacing Locket with a cost adjustment, because obviously it's going to outpace an item that's much cheaper than it. But with a cost adjustment, Warmogs is already outpacing Locket. So the question is, all these things that you're getting that are bonus, are they going to, the Warmogs passive, the 4% movement speed, are these things going to make up for Locket's active is really the question. And so when we get into the numbers, really, even if we're just looking at the completed item versus a completed item, and I'll say that that's not really the full picture, and so we'll get into that too. When you look at the completed Warmogs versus a completed Locket, what we're essentially saying is that, and we don't have to read through all the math, but what we're essentially saying is that Warmogs is going to make you 10.1% tankier than Locket, even if you spent all of the gold that it costs extra compared to Locket. If you did that gold adjustment and took all of that gold and put it into the most efficient thing you could possibly get, which is just buying a bunch of health. And keep in mind that if you actually build Locket first, unless you're going to go Warmog second or something like that, you're not actually going to be able to build any other item in the game on support that's actually going to allow you to spend 1,100 gold just straight up on health, on giant spells or ruby crystals or anything like that. So, and then if you're going to go Warmog second anyways, you might as well go at first, because Locket's better as a second item than as a first item, because Locket's pretty useless in a 2v2 situation and becomes stronger if you're around multiple people for the active, whereas Warmogs is better early because of the tank stats that it gives and the efficiency there. So the raw items, the tank stats on Warmogs are better early compared to Locket, and Locket's active is much stronger when you're grouped around 5 people if you're building it more as a second item instead. Now, Knight's Vow is a little bit more competitive, and the reason for that probably has to do with the fact that the tankiness that you get from Knight's Vow is more than the tankiness that you get from Locket if you're into a standard bot lane matchup. And Knight's Vow is also built, as I've said before, very, very consistently if you're already ahead. It's an item that you're going to want to build when your AD carry is dealing way more damage than they're taking, or when you have somebody else on your team who's fed who's doing the same thing. And so the win rates on Knight's Vow are really inflated, for that reason, because I will go Knight's Vow, but only if I'm really, really far ahead. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. So essentially, if you're becoming 10.1% tankier than Locket, even if you do a gold cost adjustment, you're essentially comparing, okay, I'm 10% tankier, I get 4% movement speed, and I get the Warmog's passive compared to the active of Locket. And again, especially when we're talking about like as a first item, Locket is pretty weak as a first item. You're getting like 100 to 200 shielding in lane in a fight where you're using Locket. In team fights, you're getting more, maybe 300 shielding per team fight, but maybe a little bit more than that. Maybe you could say on average, maybe more like 360, maybe 400, depending on how good you are at using it. But there's a couple of things here. One, for a lot of players, and this obviously isn't really the case for me, but for a lot of players, active items are hard to use. And so that's going to be a huge problem that Locket has. So if you're not good at using active items, that's actually another reason why Warmogs might be better. But anyways, so because those numbers I'm citing, like 300 or 400 shielding per fight on Locket, are something that I would get as someone who's very proficient at using that active item and has been using it for years and years and years. Somebody who's in silver and gold is going to forget to use it half of the fights, and the fights that they do use it in, they're probably not going to block as much damage as the timing that I would save it for. So that's just the reality of the situation, is their numbers are probably worse, which makes Warmogs even better, or Knight's Vow even better in comparison, because you don't have to really manage it too much. Warmogs is actually even less management maybe than Knight's Vow. Knight's Vow, if you're using it properly, actually needs to be reapplied if somebody dies and things like that. You know, and you want to make sure that you have it on the right target beforehand, you know, so that your cooldown is up when you're actually in a fight, so that if that person dies, you can put it on someone else in the middle of the fight. But, you know, that being said, again, if you think about it, just think about, well, how much HP do I have if I've completed Warmogs? And in my experience, I usually have around 3,000 HP when I've completed Warmogs on most of these support champions. So on Braum, Leona. So if I'm 10% tankier, that's going to give me an extra 300 HP. Now, 300 HP for me is not as valuable as being able to block 300 damage for my teammates as a support, especially because you're able to use that 300 HP as a shield to bait people. You know, it's more like barrier compared to having that HP permanently as HP. So there is a little bit of an advantage there. But just in terms of the raw numbers, keep in mind that essentially being 10% tankier is giving you, you know, it's giving you as much HP as the Locket Shield would give your whole team. And now you've got Warmog's passive for free, plus 4% movement speed. So that's essentially the way that I look at it when I'm reading this item, is Warmogs is making me tanky enough that I'm essentially getting the tankiness my team would have gotten from the active of Locket, but on myself, which is good in solo queue, because you want to make yourself stronger, because you can rely on yourself and you can't necessarily rely on your teammates as much. So if you can put more strength into yourself, even on support, that can be kind of good. Plus you're getting the 4% movement speed and the Warmog's passive, and this is cost adjusted. So you're essentially, by building Warmogs, in my opinion, you're, compared to Locket, you're getting like the Warmog's passive and the 4% movement speed essentially for free, as opposed to building Locket. And then other than that, they're pretty even. And so that's the way that I look at the two items. It's actually even worse than this, because we're talking about how much tankier Warmogs makes you. The comparison would be like a completed Warmogs versus Locket, and then as many ruby crystals as you could buy for the 1,100 extra gold that you have. But of course, as I said, unless you're building something weird like Warmogs second and Locket first, which is just worse than building Warmogs first and Locket second, which is what I do. I do build Locket second. You know, you're not actually going to be able to build anything that gives you this HP, because most people who are ignoring Warmogs nowadays and just going Locket are going to be going like Knight's Vow, or they're going to be going, you know, something like this. And so the most HP that they're going to be able to get for their 1,100 gold is they're going to get like 200 HP in a Kindle Gem. But we're assuming 412 HP, because we actually just took the amount of gold that you got and we took the 1,100 gold and put it straight into ruby crystals. But this isn't even possible in game. Of course, you'd need 1,200 gold to be able to buy 3 ruby crystals. And as I said, there's no item that you're going to go, if you're ignoring Warmogs, on support as like a second item that's going to allow you to buy that much HP. So Locket's actually even worse, because in reality, you're not going to be only 10% tankier on Warmogs. If you actually look at what it is to build Locket and then, you know, a Knight's Vow or a Knight's Vow and then a Locket or whatever, how much tankiness you get from that, versus if you actually go the build where you're like Warmogs into Locket, you're actually way more than 10% tankier. And we'll talk about the build path, because I think this is really big. And of course, you've got to get to that 1,500 cap, which a lot of people, you know, would be confused by, to get the HP that you need to get the Warmog's passive to activate. And so that's when you're completing the items, you're 10% tankier, and in reality, even more than that. But it's actually worse while you're building the items, because while you're building, let's say, Locket, you're going to put your first 800 gold into like Kindle Gem. Whereas with Warmogs, you can go ruby, 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 which I've talked about before, which is, you know, a personal love child build of mine. which is essentially you can just keep building straight HP. And that's really, really good. We can look up like the HP versus armor curve for League, and can take a look here. So there's two charts. There's if you're versus 100% of one damage type and versus 50-50. So generally we use 50-50, but while you're in lane, of course, it's going to be closer to 100%, but it's going to depend on the matchup. Like if you're versus two mages, then, well, actually, if you're versus two mages, you know, it would be 100%. But if you're versus a standard bot lane, you know, the damage is going to really change throughout the lane, the damage composition. Early on, supports do quite a lot of damage compared to 80 carries, and then 80 carries will kind of pick up and start out damaging the support. And then you might get to a point in the lane where, you know, the 80 carry is dealing like 70-80% of the damage in the lane, and so you're much closer to this chart than you are to this chart. But regardless, what you can see here is, imagine your starting HP on most support champions. Like let's say you're playing Braum, you're playing Leona, start with like 700 HP or so. Well, it doesn't even become efficient for you to start buying any armor or magic resist until you're at like 1600 HP. So if you're at 700 HP, that means you need to get an additional like 900 HP before buying armor and magic resist become more efficient in terms of giving you more effective HP. So one of the reasons, like I said, why Warmogs is such a good item on support is just because of this efficiency curve. It doesn't make sense for you to start buying the armor and cloth armor and the magic resist in No Magic Mantle that you get from an item like Locket, or even the cloth armor and the chain vest in a Knight's Vow. It just isn't efficient to buy those items until you have a lot of HP first. And so ideally, you'd want a first item on support that gives you like 600 HP. Now, Warmogs gives you too much HP, but it's actually, you know, in this case, more efficient to have too much HP, and then to be able to, you know, get Locket, which gives you a lot of armor and magic resist, a good mix of armor and magic resist afterwards, than to only have, you know, all these resistances early, but you're like way under indexed on armor and magic resist. So no item is perfectly efficient on here. I need to do some more looking into this, but there is one item, Fimbulwinter, which can actually give you a really efficient mix of, you know, about a 600 HP starting item. But I'm not sure that it's worth building it just because of the fact that it's slightly more efficient in terms of HP. Because obviously, I think we agree that the power level of an item like Locket or Knight's Vow or Warmogs is quite strong in terms of the passives or the actives compared to an item like Fimbulwinter. But Fimbulwinter is pretty efficient, so that's, you know, worth mentioning and looking into more. But essentially, when we're building the item, and we can probably see this in some of these games if we look at my build path, I'm usually looking to build Swiftness Boots first. And you can see here, I bought 2 ruby crystals, then I bought a 3rd ruby crystal, then I upgraded one of them into a giant's belt, and then I got a 4th ruby crystal. So this is actually one of the most confusing build paths in the game. I've tried to explain it before, but essentially, you know, you're prioritizing boots, but if you can't afford it, you're going to end up getting health. I would buy tier 1 boots over ruby crystal, but it can really depend on the matchup. Generally, if you're in a ranged matchup and being able to dodge abilities and gap close is more important, then tier 1 boots is better than ruby crystal, even though it's cheaper. And ruby crystal obviously makes you a lot tankier, especially on your first back. It's a tough choice to have to buy tier 1 boots instead of ruby, but you know, I would make that in most matchups. It can be better to just go the ruby crystal if you're versus a tank, especially on a champion like Braum. Like Leona's more trying to engage in gap close. Champion like Braum is maybe going to prefer the ruby crystal a little bit more, but I tend to prefer tier 1 boots. So trying to get boots first, but if we don't have the gold, we're skipping over, and we're always starting with a ruby crystal. And we're going to buy Giant's Belt only if we can't buy 2 ruby crystals instead. So if we think about it, right, 2 ruby crystals, they give 150 gold each, or 150 health each, I mean. So 2 ruby crystals is going to give us 300 health, but Giant's Belt is going to give us, well, it gives 350, but that's on top of the ruby crystal it's building out of. So it's actually only giving you an additional 200. So you get 200 versus 300. So you want the 300 HP if you can afford it. But if you can't afford the 800 gold, if you're stuck and you only have the 500 gold or 600 gold or 700 gold, then you're getting the Giant's Belt. And so essentially you're going ruby crystal, ruby crystal, ruby crystal, ruby crystal. If you could get 4 ruby crystals, all at once, or if you back and you get 2 ruby crystals and then you back again and you get another 2 ruby crystals, that's better than having to build the Giant's Belt first. Now you may be wondering, hey Ben, there's 3 ruby crystals in Warmogs. Why are you building a 4th ruby crystal? And the reason is because it's extremely OP. The reason for this is because the 4th ruby crystal is something that you would have to buy right as you finish Warmogs anyways to activate the item. And so to get the 1500 HP for the passive to be active. So I thought about, well, do I want to complete Warmogs? And I've played with both before, but do you want to complete Warmogs and then buy the ruby crystal? Or would you rather be able to buy a 3rd or 4th ruby crystal like way early on in the game? And the answer, because of the sufficiency curve that we looked at, is you would much rather buy the HP early. Remember when we talked about how you'd really like to get 600 HP right off the bat? Well, you can actually just do that, because if you're going Warmogs and you buy 4 ruby crystals plus your boots, you've gotten 600 HP for very, very, very cheap. And it makes you way, way, way tankier, like way more than 10% tankier, because than you would be with Locket if you were comparing somebody who has like boots and a Kindle gem to somebody who has boots and 2 ruby crystals, or somebody who has then boots, Kindle gem, and like a cloth armor and a null magic mantle to somebody who has boots and 4 ruby crystals, or the guy who's, got Locket or is waiting on completing Locket compared to the guy who's got boots, 3 ruby crystals, and a Giant's Belt. The guy with those items is so much tankier, way more than 10% tankier. So that's why I say, this math that we did here looks at the completed item. But if you're thinking about where you're sitting in terms of your effective HP and tankiness, earlier on, your components are making you way, way, way tankier. I don't know, I didn't dive into the exact math, but you're probably sitting at more like 15-20% tankier than you are if you're on components of Locket. Now, obviously, maybe there is some sort of advantage temporarily if the person completes Locket, and then you're in that stage where you're still on components, but I really don't know, because, as I said, in lane early on, when you're still in that situation, you're probably only getting, even if you get a good Locket, like 200 shielding from Locket. But you're going to have more than 200 HP extra compared to that person because of the HP components that you have. We're not just talking about HP, we're talking about effective HP, which is even higher because your build's much more efficient. So the HP and the armor and magic resist that you do have is much more efficient. And so, that makes this that much better. And then the other thing you have to keep in mind, of course, is the users that were really good with Warmogs, like Braum, like Leona, and other champions. Usually these tank support champions have some sort of armor and magic resist steroid built into their kit. So Braum W gives you a bunch of armor and magic resist, Leona W and like Aftershock or any Aftershock user, Alistar ult, things like that. These things are going to help essentially give you armor and magic resist or damage reduction anyways, which makes HP even more valuable, because on those champions, when it looks like you have 40 or 50 armor and magic resist, you might actually, while your W is active on Braum or while your W is active on Leona, you might actually have, more like 60 or 80, and then it pushes it up to, you don't just need, 1600 HP, you need more like 2000 HP to be efficient during that time period at least. So, what I'm looking to do almost every game is get swiftness boots and then just try to get my ruby crystals, and then look, if I can't buy 2 ruby crystals at a time, I'll upgrade to Giant's Belt. And I'll just stack all of this HP early, and then I'll finish Winged Moonplate, and then I'll finish Crystalline Bracer, and then I will, I don't know why this doesn't show me completing Warmogs. That's kind of weird because I have it here. Obviously, I completed it somewhere in here. Doesn't show me buying the item. But anyways, obviously I complete Warmogs first and then I get Locket. So you have to get to that 1500 HP threshold, and there's two ways to do that. I've just shown you one, which I think is really good. I think this is the best way to get there because I actually think that even though it delays you completing Warmogs, it doesn't matter that it delays you completing Warmogs, because what do you get for completing Warmogs? The only thing you get for completing Warmogs is the passive. But if you don't have the passive activated, you don't get anything for completing the item anyways, except inventory space, which you don't need. So you should just build the extra ruby crystal you're going to get to activate the item anyways early on when it's more efficient, and then complete Warmogs, and as soon as you've completed the item, it's just active. Now you do have to combine some things with Warmogs here in order to get this, and there is actually a crazy way, which is new, and I haven't seen anybody talking about this, that you can activate the Warmogs or get to the threshold without even having to buy the ruby crystal, which sounds really good because it sounds like, okay, you're able to essentially use runes to undo the the nerf that Riot did, where you need that 1500 HP and you have to buy that ruby crystal instead. But I will show you something that you can do, which is quite interesting. It would actually be even stronger, but unfortunately, for some reason, I think maybe it's a little bit bugged, but it does still work. It's just you have to take an extra scaling HP rune that you shouldn't need to take mathematically, so I don't really understand why that is. I've looked into this extensively, so I have no idea why this is. My only explanation at this point is that it's bugged. But I don't know whether it is or isn't. So I'm pulling up my client here so we can look at some runes. So another way that you can get to the activation threshold for Warmogs is if you were to come into your runes, there's a lot of different ways that you can get HP, but even if you took, double scaling HP and overgrowth, you weren't going to be able to make up for a whole ruby crystal until like way too late. But there's a new thing, which is they changed biscuits to give you 30 maximum HP for each biscuit, so a total of 90 maximum HP. They changed that recently, and that's actually going to allow you to get enough HP, even if you come here and take flat health, that it'll make up for the ruby crystal, because you only need to get 150 HP plus a little bit or something. So basically, when you start adding up the numbers, you need to get to 1500 HP. Warmogs itself gives you 1500 bonus HP. Warmogs itself gives you 1000. The support item, I believe, gives you 200. So we've got 1000, we've got 200 from that. When overgrowth finishes stacking, which will usually happen before you buy Warmogs, the way that overgrowth works is usually you're going to be sitting around 40 HP, and then it's going to complete, and it's going to give you that 3% or whatever it is of your maximum HP when you've absorbed 120 minions. It's 3.5%. So that 3.5% is going to suddenly bump you from being at like 40 bonus HP from overgrowth to being at more like 120 bonus HP or 140 bonus HP. So let's see. I actually forget now, but I'm counting it as 120. So that gets you to 1320. And then you get 90 from biscuit delivery, which puts you at 1410. And then you get 65 from your flat HP rune, and that puts you at 1475. So you only need an extra 25 HP here, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing, because a lot of people would say, okay, so then instead of going the flat one, because we prefer movement speed here, just go the scaling one, and by the time that you get, which is about the time you're going to get the item anyways, by the time that you, so the scaling one, it's 10 HP per level, so this is like, the flat one is better at level 6, but then the scaling one is better at level 7 because you'll have 70 instead of 65. So you might say, okay, just go the scaling one, and then at like level 9, you should have enough HP, to activate Warmogs. And for whatever reason, this isn't working, and it's the most confusing thing. You can go into a practice tool and try this. you can see overgrowth contributing to your Warmogs HP on the item. You can see Biscuits work on the item. You can see that health per level works on the item. You can see that the flat health rune works on the item. You can see that when Overgrowth upgrades and gives you that 3.5% of your bonus HP, that is working on the item. So each individual component of these runes, they all count as bonus HP and should work for the item. But for some reason, when you only take these runes, it's just not working. It's just not counting something. And I'm really, really confused as to what it's not counting, because I even looked like you would, well, what is the number that we're off by? Let's subtract and find out what number we're off by. And it's just some random number. It doesn't make any sense, because Biscuit's always 30. Health scaling and flat health is always by 10, or if you have the flat health by 65, but we weren't needing to do that in this situation. And then Overgrowth would be the only one that could possibly be giving you a single digit number, which it was off by some random single digit number. But it doesn't seem to be Overgrowth, because Overgrowth obviously is contributing into the item. It's just the weirdest thing in the world. I don't know what it is. So for some reason, probably because of a bug, you do actually have to take the flat health and the health scaling rune in order to get enough HP for the item to activate, even though mathematically it should be enough if you just take... if you were to just go this and hit level 9, that should be enough, but it's not working for some reason, so I don't know. So you can take these runes, and because Biscuit Delivery gives you an extra 90 flat HP, you can now hit the Warmogs HP threshold to activate the passive, all in your runes and with your support item and with Warmogs, without needing an extra Ruby Crystal, so that you just activate the item as soon as you buy it. However, so why do I prefer buying an extra Ruby Crystal early, as opposed to doing this? And essentially, I actually think that buying the Ruby Crystal early, which, keep in mind, you're going to buy the Ruby Crystal in this build path right after anyways. When you're going into Locket, it's still better to buy the Ruby Crystal, which is really weird, but it's still better to buy the Ruby Crystal. I guess I'll have to explain that. So it's a little bit strange, actually, but even though this curve says that you should be buying armor and MR, if you're, let's say, we're at 3,000 HP now, and yet we're still down here at, let's say 70 armor and 45 magic resist or something like that, it clearly indicates that we should be buying armor and magic resist. But this is per unit of gold. The reality is that when you go to buy a Ruby Crystal versus when you go to buy a no magic mantle, even at that point in the game where you're way over indexed on HP, the effective HP that you get from buying the Ruby Crystal is still better than the effective HP that you get from buying no magic mantle. And a lot of the reason for that is because, and it's one of the reasons why health is just straight up OP, is that a no magic mantle only works on half of the damage. So if you're assuming that, half of their damage is magic and half of it's physical, and you're just trying to build generically against that, a no magic mantle is just half as effective, essentially. And so your effective HP, against magic resist is a lot better from no magic mantle, but overall your effective HP is not that much better. And so Ruby Crystal is just a really strong item in general. And so even when you're over indexed on health like this, it's still better to buy the Ruby Crystal instead of the no magic mantle, even though the chart indicates that you should spend each additional unit of gold that you have on armor or magic resist. It's usually still better to buy the health, which is really confusing. So that it just, kind of is what it is at that point. So that's confusing, but you're probably going to buy the Ruby Crystal anyways. And because you're going to buy the Ruby Crystal anyways, again, why not just build it earlier? But regardless, even if you were going to go the no magic mantle, or you felt that was better, you don't want to have to adapt so many of your runes in order to do this. So, for example, I don't personally like magical footwear. I really like rushing swiftness boots right now, and have for a little while. I think that movement speed is pretty important. It can depend. I think that I've gone back and forth because at certain times I've loved magical footwear. I love free gold in your runes, but and I feel like movement speed can be kind of a fake stat that doesn't actually translate into a lot of real value for you. But it's very important to understand that I think if you have hands, the movement speed that you get from being able to buy those boots is going to be really, really important. And so I think the better you are as a player, the more you get out of movement speed. And so if you just think like, well, I don't know, this isn't the best comparison, but let's just say that, you go magical footwear, it saves you 300 gold, and that 300 gold then allows you to buy at 10 minutes, like, not quite a ruby crystal, but let's call it a ruby crystal. So you get an extra 150 HP. Well, the thing is that, like, I bet that you could have made up for that 150 extra HP that you have by dodging abilities. Like, you can dodge two abilities or one ability and it'll, refund you 150 HP. So I just think that, like, for that reason, the movement speed is really good. Movement speed is also kind of this, it's more of like a, what is the word for it? It's like a duality. It's either a yes or a no rather than a about the exact amount that you have. Really, what matters is, am I faster than my opponent, or am I slower than my opponent? And you want to spend more of the game faster than your opponent, because if you're running away from them, you're actually able to run away from them. If you're chasing them down, you're actually able to catch up to them and chase them down, especially on a champion like Braum, where, being able to move to both position your E and to be able to get your passive on important targets in a team fight is really important. And so I think movement speed is actually really important on Braum for those reasons. And you're essentially guaranteeing that you're going to be slower than the opponent for the first 10 minutes of the game. And especially in solo queue, where games are decided so early and it's the early game that's the most important, I feel like that's, it just kind of sucks. So I don't really like having to take magical footwear here. With this, you could take something else like Cosmic Insight, but I really don't feel like any of these other runes are that good on Braum. Approach Velocity can be okay, but not that good. If you're, maybe if you're with an Ash, you could go, Biscuit and Approach Velocity. But, I also like the movement speed here instead of the scaling HP. And the other thing is, if you're going Warmogs anyways, you really need one thing that you do really lack when you build Warmogs is you lack ability haste. So whereas Warmogs gives you no ability haste, whereas Locket at least gives you 10. And that's not a ton, but it makes a big difference. And so, being able to go this rune and getting extra ability haste is really important here as well. So I don't like having to compromise quite so many runes, my entire secondary runes and my movement speed. And, potentially, if it was to work right, having to go, well, I guess then you wouldn't have to sacrifice the movement speed, but like scaling instead of flat and stuff like that. I just don't like how much it changes my runes. And I think that actually being able to go those 4 ruby crystals early is very, very strong. So that's how, more or less, I'm still dominating with Warmogs, even though a lot of people wrote off the item as dead. I think it's still extremely strong. There's a lot more research that needs to be done, and looks taken into other items that give a lot of HP. For example, Heartsteel, for example, Fimbulwinter. These are items that I'm really curious to learn more about and look into more, but I just haven't had the time because, so Warmogs gives you more HP for the cost than any of those other items. It's more efficient per HP that you get, the gold per HP that you get, which is good later on. But again, you're over-indexed on HP early, so probably Fimbulwinter or Heartsteel could be better early on support. But like at what cost? Because I don't think that the passive on Heartsteel or the passive on Fimbulwinter are as good as the passive on Warmogs. But maybe. So those are items that should really be looked into because Heartsteel gives the same thing. And so the question would be, what is really the trade-off between going Warmogs or going Heartsteel? I just think Heartsteel is a little bit hard to abuse on support because you're not always, especially as a melee support, how often are you really going in and getting Heartsteel stacks? It's usually a top lane item because they're kind of trading and brawling all the time up there, whereas like especially on Braum at least, it's kind of rare and hard for you to actually like get onto people and auto attack them, especially the higher up you go in rank. So I don't know that Heartsteel's all that good. And then of course, Fimbulwinter's passive compared to Warmogs, and then I think Warmogs still might have a little bit of a more tanky and efficient build path early. I don't know that you have to go tier. The problem with Fimbulwinter is that if you want to actually stack the tier, which you need in order to get the full HP amount from the item, you have to go that tier early, but it's not easy to stack. Leona and Braum are not designed to be tier stacking champions. So it's very difficult to stack the tier. And while you can stack it, it's a little bit troll because the whole point of why Warmogs and all this HP is good, it's not about completing the item and getting all the HP, it's about the components immediately making you stronger. And your backs are really, really efficient because no matter how well or poorly the game is going, it's like every single recall you get a Ruby Crystal. So even in your games where you're doing really bad, it's like, okay, I got tier 1 boots, okay, I get a Ruby, I get a Ruby, I get a Ruby. Your power level is always increasing. You're never stuck on a bad recall. And if you're ahead, right, and you're getting a lot of gold, boom, you get 2 Ruby Crystals, you get a Giant's Belt, you get 3 Ruby Crystals, something like this. And so it's very, very strong because the components are just so cheap and so efficient. And so it's really about the components, and I don't know that going Fimbulwinter and getting like tier is quite as good. But this is essentially, 2 ways that you can activate Warmogs without having to complete a second item on support. And the way that I obviously prefer, which is just buying a 4th Ruby Crystal early and holding on to that until you complete your Warmogs to make sure that the item activates as soon as you buy it. And I feel that component and having an extra one early is actually quite strong. Kind of the build path that I would go and how it stacks up to Locket. Now, as far as Knight's Vow provides very similar damage reduction, in my opinion, to Locket overall, but it is a little bit better early because of the damage composition of most bot lanes that you're playing against. But if you're playing against like 2 mages, it's not really that good. If their bot lane's still like 50% magic damage because they have like a really strong mage support, or maybe their mage support gets fed or something like that, maybe they have a low damage 80 carry, then it's not as good. Knight's Vow is also particularly much better when you're far ahead as a team and your person that you're putting it on, and it's much weaker if you're behind. We've talked about that before. Knight's Vow will essentially amplify the damage that your team is taking unless your AD carry is out damaging the damage that they're taking, or whoever you put it on. So just make sure that, while you can go Knight's Vow instead of Warmogs if you're getting really far ahead, just be careful with when you're going the item, because you don't want to build it if they're, if they have a significant amount of AP, or if they, are actually just winning. And so it's Knight's Vow is good, but it's never going to be a permanent first item. And since, again, it's comparable to Locket in terms of, I think that the passive and the active are fairly comparable in terms of value. In, let's say, like more average scenario or something like that, or a scenario where you actually build it. Because of that, it's kind of the same argument, Knight's Vow versus Warmogs, as Knight's Vow as Locket versus Warmogs, which is you're going to make up for the damage reduction that you would have given to somebody in terms of the amount of extra tankiness that you have yourself, which can be more valuable to allow you to have a bigger impact on the game, which is what you want in solo queue, even though that's kind of selfish for a support. And it does make you a little bit more tanky against physical damage than Locket, but not by much, because we're talking about a Kindle gem and a chain vest compared to like 4 ruby crystals or like 3 ruby crystals and a giant's belt. Even the winged moon plate gives you, this was actually a buff, gives you 50 extra health now on top of the ruby crystal when you complete it, plus, you know, even more movement speed, which I think is really great. So, you know, I think Warmogs is still in a really good spot. And, you know, if you're more of a statistics person, let's see, if you're more of a statistics person when it comes to this sort of thing, obviously, if you go look up the numbers, it's still quite competitive with these other items. You can see that it's got a higher win rate than Locket by a significant amount, but of course it is being built less. And it does have a slightly lower win rate than Knight's Vow, but like we talked about before, a lot of that is because Knight's Vow is being built more when you're winning instead of when you're losing. You will never build this item, and so its win rate's going to be pretty inflated. We don't really know by exactly how much, so it's kind of hard to compare. The main thing when you're looking at these win rates is to note that Warmogs is nowhere near dead because it's outcompeting Locket in terms of win rate, and you know, just it's obviously hanging in here as quite a decent item compared to these other ones. So it's going to come down to more of the analysis like we talked about, and these kind of the numbers and people's opinions on it, playing with it, versus, you know, only being able to look at the win rate, which can be skewed by, you know, oh, this item costs more, or which would, you know, favor Warmogs having a higher win rate, or this item is built more when you're ahead, which would favor like a Knight's Vow. You can see that it's still outpacing, you know, Locket. If you build it as a second item, it seems to be outpacing Locket and Knight's Vow and stuff like that. But you know, so it's obviously quite strong. And we can look at some other users. Braum's not even really the best Warmogs user or anything like that. Let's see, maybe it's being built a little bit more on Leona. Same situation here. It's outperforming Locket, but, you know, underperforming Knight's Vow a little bit, but that's not too much of a surprise because people, again, are building Knight's Vow when they're really far ahead. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on Warmog. So we were going to wrap it up with, you know, my solution, because I've been complaining a lot about ranked. I know people don't like to listen to me. Well, some people do, but look, I don't want to spend a lot of time just complaining about ranked. Obviously, I want to get back to making videos even like this, but more so on like hard skills in the game rather than like item comparisons, although those are always great too. But, and I will get back to that, trust me, but this is a big problem, right? Like, there's a distinction, right? Like, I'm not complaining and saying that I'm hard stuck because of the way that they did the reset. That's not what I'm saying. I understand that if I was better as a player, that I have a lot of room to improve, and that if I got better with the way that I played the game, that I could hit Challenger for the first time. But it's obviously going to be difficult, especially since I'm putting a lot less time into League, you know, with my my son. So, you know, and that's been amazing. So, look, I'm not making any excuses in that regard. When I complain about that, there being too many splits and about the reset being too hard and the LP gains not being appropriate and that sort of thing, it's because something's really wrong and it's going to cause people to quit the game, and I don't want the game to die, and because frankly, I don't think that it's fair. And while I'm going to, you know, whether there's something that's unfair or not going on, I'm going to give it my all to find other ways to get to where I want to get to and to improve as a player. Regardless, if something's unfair, you know, that Riot's doing, I'm going to call it out. And it's not just complaining to complain. I don't want the game to keep dying in NA. That's, you know, I want the game to keep going. So my solution was, after reading a lot of feedback, well, I should just win 60% of my games in Masters. A lot of misunderstandings there, but we don't need to get into it. The point is that the one thing that people said, which was actually true, is, you know, will you be able to get back to your main rank or whatever, your peak rank or whatever, quicker on a Smurf account than you will on your main account? And that shouldn't make any sense, right? Because my main account has good MMR. we were Masters 400 LP for the last 2 splits in a row. So if my goal is to get back to Masters 400 LP, it seems like it should be relatively simple for me to just be able to get there pretty quickly on my main. But as we talked about, even at a 55% win rate, I've already played 47 games on my main account, and I'm still only in Diamond 2 37 LP. And so like we've talked about before, last split it took me 300 games to get back to 400 LP at a 53% win rate. Probably something similar is going to happen here. I'm 600 LP off of Masters 400 LP. So to go 600 LP, if we just divide that, if I'm gaining 20 LP a game, I'd need to win 30 wins over losses. I'd need to win 30 more times than I lose. And that's going to take me, this is kind of a rough estimation, but and we'll get into the more detailed one because this is what's actually really interesting about what I'm about to say about whether it's faster to get there on a Smurf. But if you, have to win 30 more than you lose, say at a 53% win rate, I mean, I guess we can use 55 because I'm sitting at 55, but I would expect it to maybe go down to 53 or something like that. But let's say I'm sitting at 55%. If I'm sitting at a 55% win rate and keep maintaining that all the way back to Masters 400 LP, then I get 10 wins over losses for every 100 games I play. So to get 30 wins over losses, I'd need to play 300 games. So if I was gaining plus 20, minus 20, which I'm not, to be fair, but if I was gaining plus 20, minus 20 and winning 55% of my games, it would take me 300 games from where I'm at now to get back to Masters 400 LP, which is my exact same experience last split, which is it took me like 350 games to get back to my main rank. Well, the problem is that there's only 4 months in a split. So unless you're playing more than 3 or 4 games a day, which is what I play, about 3 or 4 games a day on average, you'd have to play 5, 6 plus games a day in order to have any, real chance at making any progress, any time to make any real progress. You're just getting reset over and over and over again. And so that's not good. Now, in reality, that's not the perfect example because maybe my win rate will go down as I move up a little bit. And my LP gains are obviously more positive than that, especially after the change that they made in 1420 to higher MMR account LP gains because, well, we called out that it was broken and Riot actually addressed it and fixed it a little bit. So obviously you can see that this is the only, well, these 2 games are the only games I've played since the change. And you can see that since the change, roughly speaking, I mean, it's going to be a little bit different because this is only 2 games on one account, right? But I went from losing 17 to only losing 16, and I went from winning 23 to to winning 25. So that is quite a nice swing. Right here was a 6 LP difference, and here we have a 9 LP difference. But it's only, it's only a 3 LP swing per like win and loss pair. So it's nice. But it's not that great. It's like so it equates to an average of an extra 1.5 LP per game. So look, we assumed in those numbers that we did that said it would take like 350 games, including the 50 I've already played to get back to Masters 400 LP. We included a 20 LP for win, 20 LP for a loss. Obviously, I'm getting better LP gains than that, so maybe it'll take 200 or 250. But that's if I also keep winning 55% of my games. So if that slips to 53% or something, maybe it will be around 300. You get the idea. It's an estimation, but it's probably going to take around 300 games. So where are we sitting on the Smurf account? So I picked up an account. Well, I shouldn't say it like that. I picked up an account that I had been playing on for a long time before. This was actually my Braum top account, which is why it had been stuck in silver and gold. And then this was the account, I don't know if anyone remembers, that I went 8-0 on last split. People wanted to see what it looked like if I was smurfing. So I just recorded myself playing a little bit, stopped after 8 games, went 8-0. And this split, I picked this account to continue climbing on because what I had figured was, and we've talked about this, Riot has made Smurf accounts be able to move up in MMR very, very quickly. That's their way of mitigating smurfing, is not to actually like ban smurfing to prevent people from smurfing, but instead to just move the smurfs through the ranks much, much quicker. And so if you're continuing to have a lot of success in ranked, you can just like, place really high, shoot past a bunch of ranks. So we actually placed into gold 4, I believe, which makes sense since the account was gold 1 before. It probably would be even more efficient and better if I had started on a completely fresh account, but I don't have a fresh account and I'm not going to spend the time to level one because this is all about saving time. But we're doing a little bit of a test because, well, this may take me a little bit longer if the Smurf account doesn't turn out to be the best way to go or the most efficient way to climb. It may take me a little bit of, waste a little bit of time. At least I'll know for next split what I should be doing, because I was really conflicted this split on, do I keep playing on my main account or do I switch to a Smurf account and see if that could actually be faster? And what we can see here is, and keep this in mind because this is kind of nutty, I have played about 41 games. So I played about 40 games on my Smurf account, and I'm already in Emerald 4. And this was not a fresh account, with high potential for placement in MMR and stuff like that. This was like an account that I had been playing Braum top that's been like in silver and gold for like multiple splits or years. So this is like just taking any old random, gold account, and I was able to get to Emerald 4. I placed on my main account into Emerald 1 after my placement, or my first placement game. So that's crazy, right? Because that's not a whole lot of games to start to get pretty darn close to catching up to my main account. And my LP gains, which we'll show here, are a lot better than on my main account, because I'm gaining plus 28 or plus 29. And this actually kind of sucks. I think it'll be a little bit lower, but it was minus 22 for the last one, minus 20 for this one. I think it'll be lower than minus 22. I think this happened because I had a couple of games here that I lost, and it probably, it started looking like maybe I had peaked or something, but it was just unfortunate. Maybe I played a little bit bad here where I died 11 times, twice on a Smurf account. That's pretty bad, but regardless, we brought it back and went on a win streak. So I imagine if I did take a loss now, it wouldn't be quite as bad as minus 22, because there was a bunch of losses right here. So maybe it's minus 20 still. Either way, this is a lot better LP gains than my main account, because obviously I'm winning most of my games. And so we can just start to kind of do the math. I'm sitting at a 73% win rate. Again, this isn't a perfect estimation, but what I realized is that I need to go something like 1300 LP on this account to get to Masters 400 LP. And I need to go like, what was it, 500 LP on my main account or something about that. And the math came out to, well, if you plug in, okay, let's say I play 100 games and I win 70 games. This is on my Smurf. I win 70 games and get 28 LP for each one of those. And I lose 30 games and get like minus 20, or I may have even used minus 22 for those games. Where will I be? And it actually worked out really perfectly with where I'm at right now, that I will hit Masters 400 LP in 100 games on my Smurf, and in an additional 100 games on my Smurf, and an additional 100 games on my main. So at this point, it would be just as fast. And again, these are estimates because LP gains and losses will change. My win rate will change on both my Smurf and my main, probably more drastically on my Smurf as it starts to slow down. So these are just estimates, but roughly speaking, it looks like if I play another 100 games on each account, I will get to Masters 400 LP at the same time. So at this point, the accounts are essentially equivalent in terms of how fast it is to climb on one versus the other. And I played 41 games on this account already, but on my main account, I've played 47 games. So that's kind of concerning. It's pretty close, but it does look like it's actually going to be a little bit faster to get to Masters 400 LP on my Smurf account, which was like stuck in gold or something like that, playing Braum top for 20 games before. I mean, we can look at the history of the account because I think that's kind of important. Let's see, where do we go? Where is that? So nothing here. Oh, we gotta go back further. Okay, so we had in 2022, I went 19 and 22 playing Braum top on the account, and I think I finished gold. I think I did manage to get gold on Braum top 2022. Well, it says I ended silver 190 LP, so maybe I didn't make it, but I swear I got to gold on Braum top. That was hard. Do not play Braum top. That sucks really bad. And then I didn't play in 2023 split 1, 2023 split 2. I went 2-0 on Braum and 2-3 on brand support, which was not very, I did not do a good job there. And so, you know, not very many games, and ended something like gold again. And then nothing. And then obviously last split, I went 8-0. So if we're keeping track, by the way, so I had these games where I did really poorly on Braum top. Oh, this is going further back. So we had the games where I did really poorly on Braum top, and then nothing, and then 2-0 on Braum, and then 8-0 on Braum, so that's 10-0, and then now 27-9 on Braum, so something like 37-9 on Braum since I played Braum top on the account. So that's pretty darn good. But what's interesting about this is essentially, like I said, an account which MMR, because of those 40 or so Braum top games, should kind of have been basically stuck in, you know, silver 1, gold 4 territory. And so it would be even better on a fresh account, right? So if you hand leveled an account, playing all those normal games would, you know, to level the account would actually increase your MMR quite a bit. So you might place directly into Emerald, you might place into Plat, and then it's a whole nother, you know, ball game. Although those, if you're only concerned with time, obviously having to spend the time leveling an account is going to take some time too. But it does look like even for an old account that was like stuck in gold, I'm able to take this account and I'll probably get to Masters 400 LP in roughly the same number of games as it would take me on my main, or maybe even a little bit faster, which is just nuts, because why should an account that was in gold have a faster climb to Masters 400 LP than an account that was Masters 400 LP? The account that was Masters 400 LP should get back to Masters 400 LP relatively quickly, and an account that was in gold should not be able to get there faster. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But because of the LP gains, because of being able to win more games, because it's a lower rank, you're actually able to climb way faster on a Smurf account. Again, if you were on a fresh account that was completely unranked and had no MMR, or on an account that had, like, you know, kind of higher normal game MMR headed into ranked because you played all those normal games to level the account, then your climb would be even faster. And so it would be for sure you would climb faster on a Smurf account than on your main account. And obviously if you climb with the Smurf account, well, now you get to have two accounts in Masters. So now you have a second account to play a different role if you want to learn a different role at a high level, or to you know, practice other champions or something like that you wouldn't normally be comfortable picking on your main, or to be more comfortable with, let's say, dodging more frequently, which is really strong. So dodging anytime you get a bad matchup or a bad lobby, and then just going onto your other account and kind of grinding 2 or 3 accounts at once, but with, you know, more dodges so that you're able to win way more of your games. These are the kinds of things that you're enabled to do when you have 2 or 3 accounts in high elo, which I haven't had before. The highest I've ever gotten, I've only ever gotten 3 other accounts besides my main to Diamond. And the first one got banned because it was the only account that I bought from a website, which is why I recommend hand leveling your own accounts. And the second one got to Diamond 4 and then decayed. And so I don't think I've ever been past D4 on that one. And then the third one, I got to Diamond 1, but not to Masters. And mostly I duo with my friend on that account. So it's like an account for playing with my friends that are diamond, not an account for like me trying to get to masters. So I wasn't trying to get the account to masters necessarily. I mean, well, I guess you could say I was trying, but we weren't putting in very many games on the account, and playing with a friend who needs needs to work a little bit on his game in order for us to get to masters together. Let's put it that way. So what I'm getting at is that I've never had another account in Masters before. So if it's going to take me the same number of games to get to Masters, or to get to Masters 400 LP as it would take me on my main, why do it on my main instead of doing it on a Smurf account? So now I have two accounts in high elo, right? That just, you get an extra account for the time that you're putting in at that rank, which is kind of nice. It also opens up all kinds of other things. Like, let's say you have, which you see people do all the time, let's say you have a bad start to your split. Like, sometimes you don't play well, or you have an unlucky start, you go 0-10, on your placements, or right out of your placements and stuff. Well, you can just hop on another account that you have that was the same MMR, and it's like it never happened. Like, it wasted your 10 games or whatever, but it warmed you up for the season. And, now you're able to go on a new account and get a second chance to start over. Whereas for me, I only have the one account. So if I have a bad start to my season, it's kind of Jover. So, obviously we'll keep up with how this is going. I'm not able to play like a ton, but it's going pretty well. And, yeah, I mean, I think we'll see how it goes. So I'll let you know once I played the same number of games on my Smurf as on my main. I'll let you know once I've gotten both accounts to Masters, and I'll let you know once I've gotten both accounts to 400 LP. I plan on doing both because I'm doing it kind of as an experiment. It may take me a little bit longer as a result, which kind of sucks. But I'm hoping maybe next split I'll hit it really hard, especially at the start of the split, especially if I have two accounts that I can use. Because rank's a little bit weird right now. Weirder than it's been in a long time, especially for high elo. I mean, one of the things that's really crazy, is that if we go to the leaderboards, it's been almost a month since the season started, and there's only 38 players in Challenger, which is really weird, right? Like, the split is 4 months long, and we're almost a month in, and there's supposed to be 300 people in Challenger, and there's only 38 people in Challenger. This is not usual. Early season Challenger is actually a meme, because you can, so let's say for me, for example, I've peaked even in like GM at like 600 LP before. Let's say that I had ended at like 600 LP. Well, it should be really fast, barring these changes, that have been made this split. But normally, it would actually be pretty quick for me to climb back to 500, 600 LP if I was 500, 600 LP before. Well, the way that Challenger and GM and all this stuff work at the start of the split is, sure, when you promote to Masters, you promote to Masters. But how does it work when you promote from Masters to GM? Like, what is the cutoff? Because you might think that, like, if you promote to Masters, I think it even used to work this way. When Masters and Challenger existed and GM wasn't a thing. When you promoted into Masters the first time, you'd like automatically promote to Challenger, just because there weren't enough people in there. It doesn't work that way anymore. What they did was they set LP thresholds, because that was kind of ridiculous. Like, a Masters 0 LP player could climb back to Masters 0 LP, and just because they played 30 games a day without sleeping at the start of the split, they were able to hit rank 1 Challenger before, some Challenger player was, because that Challenger player was like chilling and playing like 3 games a day or something. And so that was just kind of dumb. And that's why early season Challenger was a meme. Even once they introduced LP thresholds, so you have to get 200 LP to get promoted to GM, and you have to get 500 LP to get promoted to Challenger. Even once they introduced those LP thresholds, it was kind of ridiculous, because, you could be a GM 500 LP player, sometimes even a Masters 500 LP player, depending on where the, how many people were playing, how competitive it was, that split. you could be like a Masters 500 LP player and then come into the start of the split and still do the same thing. You get back to Masters 500 LP, and if you did it fast enough, if you played all those games in the first couple of days, then, you just instantly get promoted to Challenger because you had 500 LP. So early season Challenger is really easy to hit, and same thing with early season GM. And so a lot of people get there really quickly. Usually it fills up really, really quick. And then once 300 people have gotten to 500 LP, then the threshold moves up on its own as the lowest player out of, the lowest 300 player has like 550 LP and then 560 the next day and stuff like that. And then the threshold moves up and it becomes harder to get there. And so by the end of the split or the end of the season, that's when it's hardest to hit GM or hardest to hit Challenger, because the LP threshold is higher and people are playing every day to, not decay, to compete for those spots and to try to climb into those spots. And so it becomes a bit of a mess. And people will usually camp their spot too. So like, if you have 2 weeks of not being able to decay, a lot of players will just stop playing in Challenger and GM for the last 2 weeks of the split. And so then if you're not in actually at 2 weeks before the end of the split, you're kind of screwed because there's not a lot of people to match with. It can be really long queue times, hard to find a game. And when you do find a game, it can be like really weird variants where you're getting like Master GM Challenger players in the game at the end of the season because there's not enough people. So anyways, the point is that it's actually relatively easy to get to 500 LP because anyone who was 500 LP or around there in the previous split should be able to climb back. But we can obviously see that that's not the case as much as it used to be, because rather than Challenger filling up in the first week or two, we're sitting here almost 1 month into the start of the split and there's only like 30 people in Challenger, which is just mind blowing. So, let's see, what is like the top guy at? Wow, the top guy's already at 1,200 LP though. That's still crazy. Maybe the server's just dead then. I mean, if this guy's at 1,200 LP, maybe these other people are just trolling. Wow, this guy has played 158 games already. That is nutty. That guy's a beast. So, that's the way that it is. And it looks like it's faster to climb on a Smurf. I will continue to test that. But from the LP gains that I'm getting now, and from the win rates that I have now, which is pretty well established on about close to 50 games played on each account, because 40 on the Smurf, closer to 50 on the main. Win rates are pretty well established. LP gains are pretty well established. They will, both of those factors will change a little bit, but from the math that I'm getting, it will take about 100 games to get to Masters 400 LP on both. Which means that since I played 10 less games on my Smurf than on my main, I will actually be able to get there faster on my Smurf, which is wild. And then, like I said before, if you are on a completely fresh account, if you are on a account with high normal MMR because you leveled the account in normal games first and those contributed to your ranked placement, and you placed in Platinum and Emerald instead of starting from Gold like I did on this account, then it would be even better, even faster to climb. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to let some of my other accounts, it takes a long time to do this though, but we'll see. Preferably what I should start doing is letting some of my other accounts that I'm not really using, just not play on them at all and let them reset their MMR. Because if they reset their MMR, that's going to be a lot better for me than where they're at now, because you can place much higher, than Gold nowadays. And so if I wait a year, I can let those accounts reset. And instead of having, because I'm going to have to, if this is true, I'm going to have a new account every split. And if I have to have a new account every split, that's a whole lot of leveling. And actually, if you add the time it takes to level the account, it's not exactly worth the wait. And so that's kind of an issue, right? And I don't want to buy accounts because I know the accounts that you buy often get banned. So, I'm kind of in a conundrum here where it's like, well, I want to save time by climbing on a Smurf account instead of on my main, but how do I do that? And it's probably going to be the best thing to do would be to let the MMR on some of my accounts that I don't need to be playing on, since I don't have time to play on them anyways, just let the MMR on those accounts, reset, so that I have those as essentially fresh accounts to play on in a year from now. So we'll see how that goes. I mean, that's still something that I'm thinking about and developing. But yeah, that's the gist. Rather long one, kind of a two-parter. But yeah, it does appear like it's more efficient to climb on a Smurf. Keep this in mind too, which is important as well. I'm climbing on a Smurf with a 73% win rate. I could be doing better, right? I could be doing better for sure. First off, I have 75% on Braum. And, that is, and we can even see, where is it? So I have a 75% win rate on Braum. So obviously, had I not played like the Leona and Nami game, even though those were positive, if I had just one-tricked Braum the whole time, I would have, a little bit of a higher win rate there because of that. You can see that in my past, we can go all the way back, but I actually have an 84% win rate on Braum in my last 19 games. So there's no reason why I couldn't have been winning 84% the whole time. In fact, it should have been easier earlier. But like I said before, I'm not really used to smurfing. And so actually, if we go back, so this is where I started here, it looks like. I actually lost a lot of games at the beginning. So if we go back and look at like the first 10 games or so, see, I was 2-2, 3-3, 4-4, 5-5, 7-6. So I was 7-6 to start on the account. That's a whole 13 games that was really, really wasted. And, basically, in my opinion, on these games, it could be a combination of factors. Like, it's probably a mix of both. I was probably a bit unlucky in this first 13 games or 12 games or whatever it was. Or it was 7-6, so 13 games. It's probably a little bit unlucky. I probably was not used to playing on a Smurf and dealing with the level of play. And I've talked about this before. It's really, really important when you go on a Smurf account that you lower your expectations substantially, because people really don't know what they're doing. And it can be very, very frustrating. And support is probably one of the most difficult roles to climb out of low elo. This is all solo queue. You can see here there is one guy I matched with twice in a row, but I wasn't duo with that person. We just happened to match 2 games in a row. So no duoing, right? Playing support solo, playing with gold and silver AD carries. I guess gold was not a fun experience. Let's put it that way. And you need to be used to or open to playing with people that are going to play at that level and adjusting the way that you play, how safe or aggressive you are. So I went into these games playing very aggressively because I know I'm a much better player than the people I was playing against. But if you're forcing too much, as we've talked about, it can be really bad, because if you expect your AD carry to somehow also play hyper aggressively like they're smurfing on the enemy team when they're just not, you're going to have a bad time a lot of times. And so there were just a couple of things. I think my Leona, I was coming off of having not played very much. My Leona was not as good as it should have been. I probably should have stuck to just playing Braum. I had some bad games in here for sure. I probably just straight up deserved to lose this game and this game and this game. Just doesn't look like I did well at all in those games. And part of the reason why that is, like I said, you just have to temper your expectations and be more used to doing that. As someone who's not used to spamming games in gold, this was an experience, and I can appreciate my teammates on my main a little bit more. What's been really nice, and I've experienced this many times before, is that as I started climbing, my games got easier because my teammates became a little bit more predictable and a little bit more reliable, and it actually got easier. I've experienced this even on my main account, which is the weirdest phenomenon, because normally ranked is supposed to be this gradual step up, and yes, your teammates get a little bit better, but the opponent gets a little bit better. I find it very difficult to climb in Diamond, but much easier to climb once I hit Masters. And low masters is kind of bad too, especially because of all the win trading going on in low masters. It's harder to continue to win 60-70% of your games because so many games are just being win traded that it's like there's less games that you can have a big impact on. Once you get to, let's say, Masters 100 LP, you kind of break away because the games aren't being win traded very frequently. The players are very, very reliable, and it's more close to what I'm used to playing with, because I'm a player who's used to playing hundreds of games at my peak. And so I'm very comfortable with how people play at my peak. I don't know how people play in gold anymore. I don't know how people play in plat anymore. All I know is that every time I tried to take bush control level 1 in bot lane, my jungler pinged me for not leashing, and I cannot believe that they're trying to make me leash every game. It's absolutely crazy. Like, low elo junglers want to leash every single game. I was literally in a matchup. I was against like a Caitlyn Lux as Braum, and my jungler is spam pinging me because I'm not leashing him, and I'm sitting in the bush level 1. And it's like it's a different game down there for sure. But I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. Maybe it will help me understand the common viewer, my common viewer, who I'm going to, again, try to not go on these rants about ranked. I'm going to try to spend more time talking about some of the fundamentals, get back to some of the how to, play League better videos, some of the concepts and things like that. Obviously, we'll get back to some of that stuff. Maybe it'll help me understand the common man a little bit better. So we will see, though. Yeah, I mean, that's it. Warmogs is OP still, and apparently Smurf accounts are OP. And that makes sense. I mean, I said this before. I've been complaining about it. It's a little bit weird because it would have been more obvious. I showed this last time. So many of the accounts, like this is level 43, this is level 63, but a lot of these aren't. So many of the accounts in Challenger usually are fresh accounts. Because of this reason, I think is a big part of it, but it's not as much as it normally is right now because we're still sort of at the start of the split. And what's weird is that we're a month in, or almost a month in, and yet I'm still saying we're at the start of the split. It's because this split has been so unique for high elo and that it's taking people so long to get Challenger. We'll be in the start of the split until like month 3, and so it's different than normal. And so because of that, right, if let's say, look at, my experience, it's going to take me like 140 games to get a Smurf account from gold to Masters 400 LP, which actually isn't Masters anymore, right? 400 LP would put me in GM at the moment. But, let's say that to get Challenger, I need 500 LP. It may take me, so instead of 140, let's say like 150, 160, 170 games, if I'm capable of hitting it. 150, 160 games is a lot. And so most people just haven't played that much yet. I mean, you look at this guy. This guy has played an insane number of games, more than most of the people on here that I see. Oh, this guy is really nuts. But this guy has played, 158 games. This guy's played this guy's played 236. Man, these people are nuts. You need to get a job. But anyways, no, so this guy's played 158 games. So you can imagine that, if someone was climbing a Smurf the entire time, they probably wouldn't have gotten to Challenger with their Smurf account yet. And so there aren't as many people who have gotten there with the Smurf already because it will take, some time or something, I think. Anyways, I am completely rambling on at this point. Good luck in solo queue and have a wonderful day.